What is up, everyone? We are back again with another 1-bar build video. I've been seeing some healers running around spamming heavy attacks, so I decided to take a look into it and figure it out for myself. And so we'll be going into a 1-bar Warden healer for PVE content. I am playing as an Argonian here, which is usually considered the best healing race, but you could also play as a Breton or whatever else you'd like. All 64 of my attribute points are stacked into Magicka, and as usual with a Magicka build, we are using the Witch Mother's Potent Brew as our food, and then we're using the Ritual as our Mundus Stone to add some percentage points onto our healing done. The Atronach would work here as well if you need more sustain, but you'll probably be fine on that front just from the food buff. Moving over to our gear sets, we'll be using 5 pieces of Winter's Respite, which is a light set found in the Western Skyrim zone. This set adds to our max magicka and recovery, as well as leaving a circle of healing frost on the ground when you cast any ability that leaves something on the ground. If you don't have access to that zone, you can always buy these pieces from the guild trader, or you can just swap it out for a different set. I'll give some suggestions in a bit, but for what it's worth, I'm wearing these 5 pieces on my chest, belt, legs, hands, and my shoes. Our other 5-piece set is the Heartland Conqueror, which adds to our resource pools, gives us some extra spell damage, and increases the effectiveness of our weapon trait by 100%, which tends to come in handy when we're using a powered staff like we are here. My 5 pieces come from my Resto staff, a ring and a necklace, as well as my shoulders. This set is craftable in Blackwood, or if you don't have access to that DLC, you can always buy these pieces from the guild trader as well, or just ask somebody to craft them for you. And as usual, our mythic is going to be the Oakensoul ring with the arcane trait and a spell damage glyph. And for a monster piece, we're using the Sentinel helm to gain a few % of straight up healing buffs. I'm wearing this one in heavy just because that's what I happened to loot when I ran the dungeon, but light or medium would probably be best to match with the rest of your gear depending on your setup. This monster helm is looted from the Darkshade Caverns Veteran Mode final boss. You could also just wear the shoulders instead and swap out the helmet for Heartland Conqueror, and like usual with monster shoulders, you can purchase those from loot boxes in the Undaunted Enclave. All of my armor pieces are divines with max magicka glyphs, and all of my jewelry is arcane with spell damage glyphs. We want as much magicka as possible, and the spell damage glyphs improve our heals, so I find that this kind of a setup works best for me. If you don't have access to Oakensoul, you could always wear a second piece of Sentinel, so head and shoulders, to gain access to that Dwemer spider, which is always very satisfying to use, and then just swap out that monster piece for a piece of your second set, so you can still gain the bonus of having those 2 full sets and the monster set on top of that. Chokethorn would work in this case as well, albeit not quite as good of a set as Sentinel. At the end of the day, you can really just be flexible with your sets and try out a bunch of different setups to see how you actually like playing. Some alternative armor sets would be Sanctuary from the Banished Cells dungeons, which buffs up your resources and the healing taken by both you and the rest of your group. You could grind out the Coral Airy dungeon and use the Maelstrom set, which beefs up your heals and has a cool area damage effect that procs when you overheal yourself or a group member. The Ice Reach dungeon has a cool set called Hitti's Hearth, which would work really well here as well. This one gives you some extra magicka and magicka recovery, as well as forming a healing aura that heals your party and reduces the cost of sprint, block, and roll dodge. Kinra would also work well here, giving you a buff to spell damage and proccing a different type of aura that gives you Major Berserk and your allies Minor Berserk. There are tons of gear sets that would work here, so you can really just go for whatever you think is fun and satisfying. And I like to mention it during every build video, so I'll mention it here again. If your gear isn't fully upgraded to gold, you can absolutely still play the game. Ideally, everything will have the correct traits, glyphs, and be fully upgraded to maximize all of your stats and buffs, but we don't all have an infinite supply of gold and transmute crystals, so just be sure to work towards upgrading and transmuting everything as you can afford to do so. And in the meantime, just have fun and play the game. Moving over into our advanced stats, you can see we have a 56% buff to our healing done. And as you upgrade your gear pieces to gold, this will start to increase just a little bit more. I think I can get mine up to maybe 60% or so. Our passive abilities are pretty straightforward. So get the armor passives that correlate to your gear sets, making sure that if you went with any medium weighted sets, you put points into the agility passive to gain some extra spell damage. Technically, if you wanted to be Mr. or Mrs. Super Big PP Healer, you'd want to use all medium armor just to get this passive to boost your heals a little bit, but whatever you want to go with will work just fine. And I always like to mention, you don't have to theorycraft and perfect every single aspect of your build unless you want to be the best player there ever was. I personally don't worry too much about everything being absolutely perfect, and instead I just play the game and try to have fun. But anyways, be sure to get all of your racial passives, anything you like to use from Alliance War and guilds, provisioning, animal companions, and green balance. And then in the restoration staff skill line, you'll want to be sure to unlock Essence Drain first. Restoration, Expert, Cycle of Life, and Absorb are important as well, but Essence Drain is our best friend here and will give us major mending after channeling a heavy attack, as well as healing ourselves or a party member for a percentage of the damage done. Over to our skill bar. Directly related to the Essence Drain passive is going to be our main skill that we want to keep up at all times, and that is Green Lotus. Along with the Essence Drain heal, we'll be able to heal more party members with heavy attacks when we run this. In order to help out our party with at least a little bit of damage, we'll also be running Deep Fissure. You could also slot another spammable heal here, like Enchanted Growth, but we usually tend to do enough heals without it and can usually sacrifice this slot for something fun. If you want to really be lazy, you could put Inner Light here as a passive Magicka steroid. Our third skill is going to be Budding Seeds, which will be our main area heal that can also be activated a second time for free to immediately burst heal, which kind of allows you to use it as a heal over time or as a burst heal that can be spammed. This one goes on the ground and procs the Circle of Frost from the Winter's Respite set, so you'll want to keep this on the ground, especially during boss fights. We're also going to slot Blue Betty for some Magicka sustain. And just like with your second slot, you can swap this out for something fun if you're just running normal content and won't really have any sustain issues. You won't really have any of those issues until you start going into veteran and hard mode stuff. And then, of course, the good old Energy Orb. We slot this because it's just all around a great heal. Your ultimate is very situational, but for the most part, I like to use Enchanted Forest. Wild Guardian would work here as well, especially if you're playing easier content and want to contribute a little bit more damage for your party. Or you could slot Warhorn here for a longer trial boss or something like that. Over to our champion points. In the Warfare category, we'll be using Arcane Supremacy to beef up our max Magicka, From the Brink to give our homies damage shields, Focused Mending to buff up our healing, and then Enlivening Overflow to help out our group members with sustain. Soothing Tide would also help out a little bit here, but overall, Focused Mending is going to buff up more of our heals since we have more single target heals than area heals. Under the Fitness category, we are using Boundless Vitality to beef up our max health, Spirit Mastery to stay true to the healer archetype and revive our downed party members more quickly, Fortified to add a bit of tankiness, especially if we are rocking light armor, and then Celerity. You could swap out Rejuvenation for Celerity or Fortified if you don't mind moving a little bit slower or being a little bit less tanky, and that could help you out with Sustain if you're having issues with that. And then, as always, use whatever you want in the craft section. I like to always use Gifted Rider, Warmount, Steed's Blessing, and Rationer. Our skill rotation is going to be very simple and straightforward with this type of character. You're basically just going to throw down some seeds for a heal and to activate that circle of frost. Throw your energy orb towards the party. Ensure that green Lotus and blue Betty are always active when you need them. And then just hold left click and channel heavy attacks. You'll use Deep Fissure when you're facing any mobs and let it run its full course so you can focus on healing. There'll be times, especially if you're running daily dungeons on normal difficulty, that you can just use green Lotus and do heavy attacks the entire time without having to worry too much about your other skills other than during boss fights. So if you're just trying to build out a quick dungeon runner character to farm transmute crystals every day, something like this would work really well for that. But at the same time, you can use the full bar to really throw down some major heals in veteran content and experiment with different types of skills as long as you keep green Lotus on the bar. So here's some footage from a quick dungeon so you can get a feel for the playstyle, which I find to be really fun. I've been messing around with this Warden character for a few weeks and haven't really been able to come up with anything that was actually fun to play, since the Warden is kind of a weird class to use. But I really like this one, and I'll probably end up leaving this one as is and playing around with armor sets as I find new stuff. I also think that the one bar haters are going to get mad at this one because for some reason there are just some people out there that are infuriated by the idea of using one bar. So if you're thinking or saying something like, you can't do that, healers have to have 2 bars, then I would say to you, cope. Alright, thanks for watching as always.
How amusing! They are stronger than they once were, you know. Keeper Araldor watches the first stone. Let's see if she's learned from me in our time together. Feels like I regained the use of a limb. If I had any. Ah, here come some new friends. Let's see if I strong will to control a Daedra of that size. I wonder what Daedra you could bend to your will. Lies ahead. I never liked him. He hums off.
I'll see you dead before you harm this stone.
Cleric power is not granted. The keepers are paying for their new power with their service to me.
Your blood will temper my thirst. Your bones will end my famine.
Only one stone remains. How easily you slaughter Danger and Keeper alike. They're much more powerful than will be made with my weapons. You are
To me, my friends,